Hello, everyone, and welcome to Connection Over a Cup. I will be your guest today, Jennifer Brown, founder of Chapter Coffee. So, why create a podcast tied with a coffee company? That's a great question. And I think it started many, many years ago. So, I found coffee shops way back before they were like the McDonald's of coffee that they are today. But I found coffee shops to be these spaces that were a home away from home. So, I could celebrate joy in a coffee shop. I could go through some tough times in a coffee shop. It was somewhere where there were aromas that reminded me of childhood, and there was a vibrancy to the community in a coffee shop. And you could be part of if you wanted to, but you could also tuck yourself away in a corner and have your own space if that's something that you wanted as well. So, coffee for me has this tie to community, and it also has this sense of warmth and acceptance. And I found it to be this beautiful shared experience where you could connect with someone that you didn't necessarily know all that well over a cup of coffee. And you could start there, and that just made it easier to connect. And so for me, community being very close to my heart, it made sense for me to have a podcast so that I could have community because I am an e-commerce business right now. And the coffee company, again, no brainer. I really want to bring the joy to others that I have always found in the shared experience of coffee. So today I want to talk about why is community just so darn important to me, and why I think it is a topic that isn't discussed often enough in today's culture. You may have heard one of the podcasts prior, and it really focused on connection with self. I've learned along the way, and those lessons weren't necessarily easy, that community with self is really probably the most important community that you can cultivate. So let me back up a little bit. I find the world on occasion to be a very lonely place. I mean, it is dependent on what's happening, but I think for so many of us, it can be a lonely planet. And it could be because of differences in orientation, political views, lifestyle. There are so many areas where we see one another as not part of our community, almost like competition or not good enough. There is a lot of judgment out there. And I think we internalize that judgment and then place that judgment on ourselves. And so that lonely world becomes even lonelier because now you are that voice inside of your head telling yourself all of the nonsense that you've heard, whether it's you don't make enough money or your job isn't considered high paying, high powered, what have you, or you're not in the best neighborhood. Maybe you're a woman and, women can't be entrepreneurs. Or you go on and on and on. The list is extensive. And I want everyone to take a moment and think about the information that we're being fed continuously, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. Most of what's out there is really tearing at the fiber of community. I mean, let's just look at social media, right? I think at its inception, perhaps it was a way for people to connect with one another, and that was the idea. I certainly hope so. But now it's turned into this platform where it's rife with comparison. It's about product placement. It's getting you to buy. There's so much coming at you constantly that your brain and your body doesn't have an opportunity to slow down and dissect the information that you're viewing and analyze whether or not that's healthy for you. Is it accurate? Is it real? I can't tell you how much of social media is actually a construct. And so, again, it's really tearing at the community that it was supposed to build in the first place. And again, our media, the news, our newspapers, most of the time it's focusing on the negative, what's not working. Not often do I see publications that are focusing on what's really good. And again, there's a lot of good out there, but if we as a culture aren't being fed that information and instead we're being fed the opposite, it's pretty hard to keep that positive mindset. I'm not saying it's not possible. It is, but it's harder because again, your brain is taking that information, nom, 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 eating it up, and then it creates kind of that feedback loop in your head. And like I mentioned earlier, if it's not a positive feedback loop, that can really hamper what you can do in your own life and how you may feel less empowered to actually go out there and create community. So again, community with self is really important. And how does one build that? That's obviously a podcast that I could host probably for more than several hundred episodes, and we probably wouldn't get to it all. But I've learned that you have to start with being okay with who you are. And for some of you out there, that is a very tall order. And for others, you were just born that way. Maybe it was, the nurturing that you had. You're just okay with who you are and how you present in the world. But that's not the majority of us. Depending on the level, right? We all have insecurities or we all have difficulty breaking into new groups, new workplaces. There is that, oh my goodness, how am I going to fit in? So I think it's most important to start with being okay with self, and you do that incrementally. It can seem insurmountable, but it's not. So, what do I mean about incrementally? Well, maybe it starts with listening to, or not even listening. That's not what I mean. Maybe it is becoming aware of the voice in your head. So many of us, once we start paying attention, can identify who that is, whether that was a person in our past, whether that's someone presently who's not necessarily contributing positively to us. Oftentimes, when we make a mistake, when we're in stressful situations, when we're kind of in that fear driven mode, the voice inside of our head is not the positive voices we've had in our lifetime. It's usually that negative voice, that one that's telling you you can't do it, and for all the reasons that you can't do it. And so it's important first to just start identifying the voice. Who is that voice? And then we can start to challenge it a little bit like, is that real? Is that really what I think about myself? And then from there, you can kind of build out. Maybe it's okay. I can go to the movie theater alone, which you might think is silly. That was a pretty big task for me when I was younger. I had all of these assumptions about what going to the movie by oneself meant. And again, that wasn't my voice when I started analyzing who that voice or where that voice was coming from, who said those types of things to me, why did I internalize it? And I remember being very uncomfortable the first time I went to a movie by myself. But ultimately, I ended up really enjoying doing that and seeing that actually as a positive and not a negative. Sometimes I just want time by myself. And sometimes I want to see a movie that no one else does. And it is really quite nice now to be able to do that without even thinking about it. There is no voice anymore. And community with self is really what allowed me to be able to, accept that challenge, work through it, and now it is a thing of the past. So again, start small. So another great question to ask yourself as you're building community with self is, what do I want? So many of us don't stop and ask ourselves this question. We are under the assumption that it's our choice, but often we're doing things for others. We're doing something for a loved one. We're doing something at work for our boss or our colleague, but so often we don't ask, what do I want? I think it's a really important question. It will lead you to different decisions more than likely than the ones that you have been making. So community with self is honoring what you actually want, not necessarily what you're getting pressured into. And sometimes it's challenging to assert oneself given the situation or maybe where this is happening again, if it's happening at work and you may disagree with the request that your boss is making of you, it's uncomfortable to have that boundary and to say, okay, do I really want to work an extra day? Do I really want to work on the weekend? Do I really want to work these extra hours? And again, if you're asking, what do I want? That will then lead you to the real answer. You're checking in with yourself, and then you are honoring what it is that you actually want. I think many of us have been raised or programmed or have been in the flow of life for so long that we often don't check in with ourselves to see where we're at. And I do think that that separation causes some of the loneliness that we sometimes experience because we're not asking ourselves the questions of, whose voice is it in my head? Why am I speaking to myself so unkindly? What are my boundaries? Am I respecting my boundaries? Am I asking myself, what do I want? Am I allowing myself to have new experiences without the assumption that this time's going to be just like the last? I think, again, if we get more curious and inquisitive with ourselves, we can find that sometimes we don't enter into new situations or engage with other people, new people, or we're not necessarily getting out into our community because we have this assumption that, well, we've already done that. And so this experience is going to be exactly like the last experience. And if that last experience wasn't positive, we're going to assume that this new experience isn't going to be positive either. And so then that really limits our ability to engage with ourselves, with others, with community. So we have to be willing to make those risks if you want to see it as a risk, or we have to allow our world to expand by refuting what your brain's going to tell you or what your mind's going to tell you, not your brain. Your mind is going to say, well, we've already done that and it's going to be just the same. And that's not actual. That's not reality because, again, you could perform the same task twice, it's not going to be exact. There is going to be a difference. Maybe not a perceptible difference, but there is a difference. And why I'm bringing that to your attention is because, again, that new experience isn't going to be the same as the last experience. So I am asking you to be courageous, and in making community with yourself, it's also being brave enough to get out there and make community with others, which leads me to community at work. So, why do I think community at work is important? Well, we spend a great deal of time with our fellow colleagues, and I believe that it's really important to have a place where you want to go. And so, let's say that the work is not necessarily fulfilling and it's a means to an end. You have to make money to pay the bills. And so you're going to this job that you don't love. But if you have colleagues there or people that you work with that you've built community with, it's actually not that bad because you can go to this job, but you see these people that you really enjoy. Yeah, it makes all the difference. Then all of a sudden, that job that you didn't love, it's not so bad. I know that there is a lot of talk around not building community at work. There's all this nonsense, all this noise out there about why you can't build community at your workplace. And in my opinion, it's really self-defeating. I encourage you to build community at work. So why create community at work? Well, it's multifaceted. One, I think that you work better together when you know a little bit more about one another. I think that if you're working with someone that you really don't have at least the smallest connection with, it makes it more difficult to collaborate. And in times of difficulty, you're less likely to be transparent about what actually isn't working. So, for example, in my professional career, sometimes there have been objectives that just aren't tenable. And if I were working with individuals that I didn't have a connection with, we probably would go round and round about what's not working in such a way that we're not actually getting at the meat of the problem because everyone is tiptoeing around what the actual problem is. It could be a person, it could be a lack of functionality on a system's part, what have you. But again, because we don't have that connection, no one's actually speaking to the problem. So when you have that community at work, it allows for more transparent conversations. You can speak to what's actually not working. And if you're part of that problem and you have community with your coworkers, they'll let you know. And not in this manner, which I was speaking to before, where, you're pitted against one another, but they're going to be challenging you in a way that only makes you better in your current role. I also think that when you're working with someone that you have community with in the professional sphere, you will actually work harder, with them or for them, if you will. I know myself that I've had many a long nights in my professional history, and I have had coworkers who have worked right alongside me and they have put in the extra time and the effort, and I have been a recipient of all of that goodness. And that's because we took time to cultivate community with one another. I knew them beyond just their role at work, and they knew me beyond just my title. And so when one of us was failing or one of us had so much work that it was untenable, we couldn't get it done, then that colleague or that partner at work came in and worked alongside you to make sure that you got it done. And that community has made my work life so much more enjoyable and had made it so that I was successful. And I can speak about my entrepreneurial journey. I will say that the relationships that I have cultivated over time have really benefited me. I worked remotely for about a decade, and I never met in person the people that I worked with. Well, not many of them. And we had such tight connections because we were so mindful about creating community with one another, even virtually. And they have a skill set or they have knowledge that has benefited me so much on this entrepreneurial journey that I am forever indebted. And even new people that I have met on this journey of coffee, they have been, for the most part, so many of them have been welcoming and have been willing to share information, share their expertise. And without those people that I have history with, without the new people that I'm cultivating community with in my professional realm, I wouldn't be successful. I wouldn't be where I am right now. And so I think that concept of, I got to where I am by my own efforts, I'm self-made, in my opinion, that is BS. Because we have all had people helping us along the way, whether or not we've been aware of it or recognizing them as part of our professional journey. The fact of the matter is, we wouldn't be where we are without the help of many. And that goes for the very wealthy CEOs out there who tout that they did everything themselves. That is absolutely not true. There are so many employees behind them, making them successful, making what they do successful, making their products successful, their platform successful. Say successful 6 times fast. I can't seem to do it. But my point is that there is this community that bolster all of us. And if you take the time to really cultivate that at work, it will only benefit you. It will only make your life that much richer. It will only make the fact that you have to show up, or I should say you choose to show up to this job every day, it'll just make it that much more pleasant. What about community in your own backyard? How many of us are guilty of not really knowing what's in our own neighborhood? I'm guilty of that. And I can say that as of recently, especially with creating this podcast, I've been much more aware of how limited I am in really knowing my community. So I've taken the opportunity to walk around, and walking is one of the best ways to really, really see a community, really see a city, really see the people in it, the businesses in it. And I've done that recently. And what I've noticed is that I've discovered all of these new businesses. I've discovered all of these small roads that led me to all of these new adventures and all of these new places that I didn't even know existed. And the only reason that I came across all of these wonderful things is because I was intentional about creating community in my own backyard. It's made my world that much more expansive. It's made it seem like I'm on vacation, even though I'm right where I've always been, but I've slowed down enough and taken the time enough to explore. And exploration is absolutely a way of creating community with oneself. You are able to, again, experience what's out there and see if there's anything that piques your interest, anything that you want to become involved with. So maybe there's a local organization that's really doing some great things and it speaks to you. You could then join this organization or be part of it in some way. Here's my pitch for small businesses. I can say that in being a patron of a small business, you really are helping that person create community with the community. Small businesses, they are the thread that holds us all together because they are supporting your local schools, they are supporting the local economy, they are making jobs available to those in the community. They are the fabric of your city or your town. And I know so many of us think, if you're in a big city, you can't cultivate community. Community is only for those small towns across America. And I don't think that's true. I think you can create community wherever you are, depending on who you are and your intention of creating community. If that's what you want to do, you absolutely can, big city or not. So when I was on my journey walking around, I entered into all of these businesses I didn't even know existed. And I was able to either talk to the proprietor or someone working there. And it was just fascinating to hear their story, hear how they arrived where they are, why did they want to open the type of business that they opened. And it was really cool, actually. I was able to see many different types of ventures and many different ways to attack the same industry to showcase a product. And I found it all really fascinating and fun. And I can say that myself as a small business owner, I really take a lot of time and attention and care when creating my products. I created these blends first and foremost for myself. There was a lack out there with regards to the type of coffee that I enjoy drinking. And so as a roaster, I really made sure that the coffees that I was roasting, they were representational of what I wanted to see in a cup. Did this espresso taste really good when I mixed it with milk? Did this single origin have all of the characteristics I was looking for when I made it as a pour over? So I took a lot of time to learn about coffee, to learn where the coffee was coming from, to talk to the farmers, to learn about the soil, all in efforts to make sure that the product that I was giving to the customer was a product that I was really proud of. And I can say most small business owners are like that. They take the time and they're dedicated to either their craft or the service or product in such a way that you can feel that connection. I can't say that it's always been my experience where if I'm purchasing something from, a mass retailer, that same connection is there. The attention to detail oftentimes is not there, or I'm not valued as a customer. And I can say personally, I'm grateful for every customer that purchases coffee from me. They're supporting me, a woman entrepreneur, and they're creating community in such a way because behind the scenes, as a customer, you may not necessarily know all of the community I'm creating in crafting, third wave coffee. So that's my pitch for small businesses. They really are the fabric that weaves us together. They're the fabric that supports the local economy, and they're really grateful for you entering their shops, purchasing their products, services, etc. And that's my pitch. I also want to mention that community with self is honoring that where you spend your money matters. I can't say that enough. I have this pet peeve about going somewhere, spending money, and I'm not valued as a consumer. It's hard earned. And so when you spend that money, they should be honoring the fact that you're choosing to spend your money there. And if they're too busy to greet you, they're too busy to answer your questions, the product that they're giving you or the service that they're giving you is subpar, don't spend your money there. Stop patronizing them, please. We can only make change if we actively decide I'm not going to shop there anymore, or, I'm not going to support that business or that person any longer. And I think so much of us don't realize the power that we have. Our where we put our money really is a choice. And if we want to see a lot of change out there, we need to be very intentional and very mindful about where we spend money. Okay, so what about community with friends? Everyone probably is thinking, why is she even talking about this? If this is my friend, of course I have community. And I don't doubt that. But I find that so many of us don't necessarily reflect on the community that we are creating with our friends. So there tends to be kind of those two friend groups, those that we've had for such a long time, and then those newer friends where we're still cultivating that relationship. And I think sometimes we forget that our long-standing friendships need just as much attention as those newly formed ones. And so, one of the areas where we can create more community with our friends is, are we checking in with them just to check in? Or, are we only checking in when we need something? So, do we call up our friend when we had a bad day? Do we call up our friend when we need something? Do we call them when we're bored? Yes, but do we also call them for no reason at all? Do we call them, just to check in or to tell them how awesome they are? And we might, but probably not as often as we should. I think, too, creating community with friends is making sure that we check on the quieter friends. I know that there's seemingly always one in the group who's the stoic, who is the one where we think they can manage everything. They're the strong one. I have an aversion to, that label, the strong one. Everyone needs attention. And this is a bit to check in on those quieter friends because maybe they can't manage it all. Maybe they would really benefit from hearing from you. And that loneliness that I speak to, those friends who are always the stoic ones, they could be managing a lot that you're not aware of because they are so quiet. And so their world could be lonely, even if they have friends in it. So make sure that you're checking in on all of your friends, not just those that are more of the squeaky wheel, those that are reaching out more often, asking for your help more often. Remember that everybody needs those check-ins. How else can you create community with friends? Well, I think leaving expectations at the door is probably the best way. And what do I mean about that? I think so many of us, with regards to relationships in general, when we have an ask or when we plan to get together and do something, we have an expectation. And when that expectation isn't met, then we have resentment or disappointment. And then that can lead to problems within the relationship. So with friends, I think if you ask them to go somewhere, or if you've purchased them a gift, or if you make plans and something changes, if you leave the expectation at the door, so to speak, you then don't prime yourself for disappointment. You allow that other person to be them and to have the experiences that they have in their own life. And so if you're connecting without the expectation of them saying yes, or, planning a get together again without the expectation that they're going to make it, or if you make plans and they cancel, you don't take it personally, understanding that things do happen, it allows for that relationship to be more fluid and for that other person to feel truly cared for as a friend, because again, you're allowing them to exist just as they are. And in doing that, that also affords you that same grace with yourself. Things do change. You don't always have to adhere to that deadline, that expectation that you have to. The you have to's, we really need to leave those out. And finally, community with our family. This one seems to be so much more challenging for so many of us, and that's because these relationships can be complicated. It may be that you have strained relationships with your family of origin. It could be that, again, your experiences are such that it doesn't allow you to be as vulnerable. And so I understand that community with family can be a challenging topic. However, I do believe there are some things that we can examine that could lend to better community with our family. So first and foremost, how do we speak to them? I found it so interesting when I reflected on how I was speaking to my family. This was probably a decade ago, and found that I speak to people at work much differently than I spoke to people in my home. And that was problematic. If I had grievances at work, I would typically respond and not react. But that wasn't necessarily the case at home. I was reacting more than I was responding. They were getting tired me, hangry me, frustrated me, depressed me. Of course, they were also getting joyous me and funny me and celebratory me. But my point is that Yes, you could argue that you're not as well-rounded in the professional sphere, and therefore, your behavior is different. But I think we should be the nicest to those in our inner circle or our family because, again, they are the ones who are there for us, ride or die. They're going to be there, through thick and thin. And as a result, I think creating community with family really starts with how we speak to them and being very mindful of how we speak to them and making sure we're responding and not reacting most of the time. We're human, we're going to make mistakes. We have that human experience. It's expected. But so often we are very quick to respond in a way that maybe isn't showing our best selves. I think too, in creating community with family, it's making sure that we carve out individual time. I think that many of us take for granted that these people are around us. And so we assume that that is quality time. It's not. We are washing dishes or we're doing laundry or we're working in the yard or we're just lounging on the couch together. Yes, but we're not really stepping into one another's worlds. And so carving out time to specifically connect with a family member leads to a much deeper sense of community. And we need to make sure that we're doing that on a very consistent basis. And it's especially important for children, making sure that at least, once a week we're carving out that time to really spend with them. And you learn a lot when you have that focus time, even with people you've known your entire life. That focus time really does open you up to their world, and then you open up as well, and they get to learn more about you because we're never constant, right? We're changing as we're growing, we're getting new perspectives. And so when we carve out that time, again, it really allows for more exploration into that relationship and a deeper community. I think we also need to be mindful to be device free or distraction free, where we're focusing on what we're doing, who we're doing that with, and being just really intentional of the time spent with that person. I can say that this is definitely an area of opportunity for me. I've been working on this for a long time, but it is something that I consistently have to remind myself of to be present, to slow down and be present. Oftentimes, if I'm so busy, even if I'm not necessarily doing something, I'm not on a device, it seems like I'm not distracted. My brain's working overtime and I'm not fully present in the moment. I don't necessarily have those memories to recall. So if I'm intentional about slowing down, being in my body, so to speak, like being in the moment, listening to that person, enjoying whether we're having coffee together or a meal, or maybe we're walking out around outside. If I'm aware of that and I'm slow enough to take it in, I have that memory. That short-term memory becomes a long-term memory, and I can recall that memory. And in those times when we're feeling a little lonely and we recall those memories, it's awesome because then we feel all those good feelings again. That loneliness tends to dissipate and life just gets bigger and fuller and more enjoyable. But we have to be mindful about creating those moments. We might be busy connecting with people all the time, quote unquote, connecting, but we're really just in their presence. We're not necessarily slowing down enough to learn them, learn about them, be in the moment, etc. So that's another way we can connect or create community with our family by slowing down and being intentional with the time we do spend with them. All right, what do I want to leave you with today? Well, I can say that change might seem scary. I know that many of us struggle with change, and that's okay. I think it's perfectly acceptable to struggle with these new ways of thinking and being. Be kind with yourself. It may be incremental for you. Some of us, may jump into this and get proficient at creating community very quickly. And for some of us, it might take some time, and that's okay. I think incremental change is one way to build some positivity around those new experiences. Sometimes if we take on too much too quickly and we fail, then all that does is reinforce all of that negativity that we have stirring in our mind already. So small is good. Start small, start with yourself, and then start moving outward and then bigger into the community until it becomes really comfortable for you. And, when you look back, you can see how far you've come. Remember that you can't give what you don't have. So you can't be less judgmental. You can't be more vulnerable. You can't be more approachable if you're not doing that for yourself. So when you have those negative thoughts, when you have the criticisms of self, remember to slow down, challenge that voice. It's more than likely not yours. Is what you're saying to yourself true? Hopefully not. And then you can refute it. And the more that you do that for yourself, the more you'll be able to do that for others out in the world. Lastly, don't be anyone but you. I know that sounds hokey, but it's so true. Sometimes we forget to remember just how unique we are. Sure, we may not have the skill set that another person has, and we may not have all of the material items that someone has or all the money that someone has. And that's okay because something you do have, another person doesn't. We're all unique, and I can say that that's what makes it so nice to connect with others and to create community. So, with that, it's been a long podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you remember to brew well and connect often. Enjoy the rest of the day. Until next time.